Just so you know, we're talking about.
Okay.
Good morning. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time pursuant to committee rules and the House rules. The chair announces that she may postpone roll call votes. Pursuant to notice, the committee meets to consider the following measures. H.R. 2986, Better Energy Storage Technology Act. H.R. 4230, Clean Industrial Technology Act of 2019. H.R. 5374, Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act of 2019. H.R. 5428, Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019. H.R. 5760, Grid Security Research and Development Act. We welcome all to the Science Committee markup of 5 good bipartisan bills. First, we'll consider the Better Energy Storage Technology Act. The BEST Act authorized the Department of Energy to conduct a cross-cutting research, development, and demonstration program on energy storage technologies, including batteries and pumped hydro systems. The Act requires DOE to create a 5-year strategic plan to coordinate research activities among DOE's technology offices. Renewable energy technology can be intermittent. Strong winds die down and sunny days turn cloudy. According to the Congressional Research Service, energy storage systems may be a key technology to enabling a reliable, low greenhouse gas emitting electric grid comprised of energy generation sources like wind and solar. Next, we have H.R. 4230, the Clean Industrial Technology Act of 2019. The act authorizes an intra-agency DOE-led research, development, and demonstration program to advance technologies that will help reduce emissions from the manufacturing sector, including steel and cement production, chemical production, and industrial heat. The research program will be carried out in collaboration with the stakeholders from industry and labor groups, allowing American manufacturers to access technologies and make them increasingly sustainable will ensure that the domestic manufacturing industry will remain competitive throughout the 21st century. We will then move to H.R. 5374, the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act of 2019. I will speak about this bill a little bit later. Next is H.R. 5428, the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019, which authorizes a broad research, development, and demonstration program on a wide variety of topics pertaining to grid modernization, including smart grid modeling, planning, and controls, hybrid energy systems, and enhanced electric grid integration of technologies like vehicles and building components. Our nation's electricity grid is undergoing a series of transformations, which includes adapting to a changing electricity generation mix, an increase in smart grid technologies, and a growing need to improve the resilience of the electric power grid. This bill will help lead our nation in developing the technologies we need by setting forth a comprehensive research agenda by DOE. Finally, we'll be considering H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act. This bill is an updated version of a bill that Mr. Bear and I introduced along with many of our Science Committee colleagues in the previous 2 Congresses. H.R. 5760 will provide legislative guidance to activities carried out by the recently established DOE Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. The bill authorizes an interagency research and development program to advance electric grid cybersecurity, physical security, grid resilience, and emergency response efforts, In particular, the bill authorizes activities on the cybersecurity test beds, education and workforce training and standards, and guidance documents for energy sector cybersecurity practices. I'm proud that today's bills are supported by a cross-section of interested groups. One or more of today's bills has been endorsed by the organizations that include the National Audubon Society, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, the Environmental Defense Fund, the National Rural Electric Cooperatives Association, Duke Energy, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Natural Resources Defense Fund, and the National Association of Manufacturers. Thank you, and now recognize our ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for holding today's full committee markup. The Science Committee has one of the best records in Congress for passing productive, bipartisan legislation, and I'm very pleased to see us upholding that tradition this morning. We've reached bipartisan agreement on the 5 energy bills being considered today. Currently, the U.S. energy sector faces a number of critical challenges, and it can be difficult to find the best path forward in a world that increasingly demands cleaner, more reliable, and more affordable energy sources. But it is our job in Congress to set the priorities to address these challenges and focus our limited federal resources where we can see the best return on investment. To deliver truly effective solutions, we must take the long-term and big-picture approach. We must support research in fundamental science that drives innovation over a broad range of energy applications and strategically invest in the early-stage clean energy technologies that industry cannot support. We must also provide for R&D to modernize and defend our critical energy infrastructure and address the complex energy needs of our nation's industrial sectors. These are the initiatives that today's bills will address. First, we'll consider this morning H.R. 2986, the Best Energy Storage Technology Act of 2019. This legislation authorizes a cross-cutting research and development program at the Department of Energy to provide necessary direction on high-priority energy storage technology research and development activities. Advanced grid-scale energy storage is an essential component of any comprehensive clean energy strategy and a priority of the current administration. Developing our grid-scale energy storage ability will accelerate the growth in all kinds of energy production, which can make use of this technology. Our second bill this morning is H.R. 4230, the Clean Industrial Technology Act of 2019. Our nation's economic stability and national security are tied to the growth of the U.S. industrial sector. Yet the demanding energy needs of industry can represent a unique challenge for our clean and secure future energy. This bill establishes a DOE program to support the development of innovative technologies and practices that will reduce industrial sector emissions while maintaining the effectiveness and competitiveness of the U.S. industry. It also requires the Secretary to establish a comprehensive strategy to develop the mission and goals for this new program. While I can't say I agree with every aspect of this legislation, I'd like to thank our friends across the aisle for meeting us at the table to come to an agreement. By having a good faith discussion, we were able to add responsible funding levels and good governance provisions to H.R. 4230 that will make this legislation a bipartisan product. Next, we'll consider my bill, H.R. 5374, the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act of 2019, which authorizes DOE's cutting-edge geothermal research and development activities. This bill establishes a geothermal computing program and includes funding for critical geothermal user facilities that will support the next generation of electricity generation from these vast and largely untapped renewable resources. I would like to thank Chairwoman Johnson for co-sponsoring this legislation and working with me to refine it. While many renewables like wind and solar are already seeing success in the market, early-stage technologies like geothermal, which are often far too expensive and risky for industry to take to scale, require federal support with R&D. By strategically investing in these promising technologies, we can continue to enhance our diverse domestic energy portfolio and bolster U.S. energy independence. While we support next-generation energy technologies and clean energy strategies, we must also increase our investment in our critical energy infrastructure. So finally, the committee will consider H.R. 5428, the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019, and H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act. Together, these two bills authorize DOE's critical work in strengthening our nation's electric grid against rapidly changing technology challenges. The Grid Security Research and Development Act authorizes the Department's critical cybersecurity and emergency response R&D activities and directs DOD to work with relevant federal agencies to develop cybersecurity best practices. The Grid Modernization Research and Development Act authorizes R&D into hybrid energy systems, grid integration, and smart grid modeling, modernizing the grid to improve its overall resilience and flexibility. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my good friends across the aisle for working with us on these bills. I appreciate that we can come together to focus on our shared interest in supporting common sense legislation to maintain U.S. national security, environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and energy security for years to come. And I'd like to again thank Chairwoman Johnson for holding this markup, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. We will now consider H.R. 2986, the Better Energy Storage Technology Act. The clerk will report the bill.
Committee print of H.R. 2986. Section 1, short
Without
title.
objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendments for any point. I now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Dr. Foster, to briefly speak on his bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas. I'm proud that the committee today is advancing H.R. 2986, the Bipartisan Better Energy Storage Technology, or BEST Act, led by myself, Mr. Caston, Ms. Herrera-Butler, and Mr. Gonzalez. I want to thank my friends on the other side of the aisle for working with me to develop a bill that will address climate change, one of the critically important issues facing our country and the world. Developing advanced energy storage technologies will allow us to modernize our electric grid and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. I will speak more on this bill when I introduce a manager's amendment, but in the meantime, I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill and yield back.
Thank you. Any other member wishing to be? Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas, for holding this markup. I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 2986, the Better Energy Storage Technology Act. I was proud to join Representatives Foster, Herrera-Butler, and Caston in introducing this legislation, and I thank them for their leadership to help sustain U.S. energy dominance with this bill. The BEST Act directs the DOE to establish R&D and demonstration programs for grid-scale energy storage. Currently, one of the biggest barriers to greater usage of grid-scale energy storage is the cost of building the storage units. The purpose of this legislation is to make energy storage more affordable by directing DOE to devise and enact cost targets for demonstration projects. Additionally, the BEST Act will create a Joint Department of Defense DOE storage demonstration program and establish regulatory actions to enable integration of energy storage into the grid. With this legislation, we're aiming to tackle one of the key innovation challenges that confronts our energy sector today. As our economy places ever-increasing strains on the existing grid, we need to build better, cheaper, and more efficient grid-scale energy storage units. If we're successful in confronting these challenges and developing the requisite storage technologies here at home, then the rest of the world will look to us as we forge solutions to some of the most difficult global energy challenges facing our society. This means more American energy jobs selling transformative technology across the world. We know onerous regulations will not decrease carbon emissions. Only innovative and smart technologies that we can export to the biggest polluters in the world, such as China and India, can help us achieve that. We have a terrible example in Germany of what top-down government regulations can do, where you spend a lot of money, regulate your economy, and don't get much done on the carbon reduction front. If we want to reduce carbon emissions across the world, I believe placing American innovation and our economic might front and center in the debate is the only approach that will work. The BEST Act does that. It is the right approach, and I urge my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to support it. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to be recognized? We will now proceed with amendments in the order of the roster. The manager's amendment. The first amendment on the roster is amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. He's recognized to offer his amendment.
All right, we have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment number 1, Amendment to H.R. 2986, offered by Mr.
I ask
Foster.
unanimous consent to dispense with reading without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 5 minutes to explain this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am introducing a manager's amendment to make technical and conforming changes to H.R. 2986, the Bipartisan Better Energy Storage Technology, or BEST Act. I'm very pleased that we're considering this bill, led by myself, Mr. Caston, Ms. Herrera-Butler, and Mr. Gonzalez, along with 50 other bipartisan co-sponsors, including Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Weber. The fight against climate change is one of the defining issues of our time. We are working hard every day to develop solutions to address this critical issue, and energy storage is essential for making progress toward clean energy economy. These technologies take many forms, including batteries, pumped hydropower, and thermal energy storage. The development of cost-effective energy storage systems will help reduce the intermittency issues of renewable generation sources like solar and wind energy, and will also provide grid services such as frequency regulation to ensure that electricity consumers receive reliable and resilient power. Near my home in Illinois, researchers at Argonne National Lab are working hard to accelerate the state of advanced batteries, including the development of novel cathode, anode, and electrolyte designs, as well as new material synthesis and characterization tools. In particular, Argonne National Lab is the home of the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research, also known as JCESR, which is a $24 million annual investment made by DOE and executed by universities and labs around the country to develop transformative battery storage technologies that go beyond lithium-ion batteries. That's why I'm very pleased to see the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology consider the Better Energy Storage Technology Act today. The bill sets forth a cross-cutting program at the Department of Energy to advance a suite of storage technologies. It directs DOE to establish a research and development program that coordinates across relevant program offices to make progress towards developing cost-effective and sustainable energy storage systems, including testing and validation activities. The bill also directs the department to develop a 5-year strategic plan to continue to identify and refine research goals for the program. Finally, the bill authorizes an energy storage demonstration program, as well as a technical assistance program to help put more energy storage systems on our electric grid. I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge the hard work of my colleague on the Science Committee, Mr. Caston, who introduced the Promoting Grid Storage Act of 2019. His bill contained many important provisions that have helped strengthen the version of the BEST Act that we're considering in front of the committee today. I'm also pleased that we will be considering amendments from my colleagues, Mr. Tonko and Ms. Sherrill, on this bill today. Mr. Tonko's amendment would bring attention to the need for improved recycling infrastructure of lithium-ion batteries and other energy storage systems in the U.S., and Ms. Sherrill's amendment would direct DOE to conduct research on advanced manufacturing techniques for energy storage systems. These important contributions make the bill even stronger, and I'm grateful for their work. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and final passage of the bill. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion or request for time on this amendment? If not, if there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Further proceedings on this amendment will be, the next amendment on the roster is the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko. He's recognized to offer his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment number 2, amendment to the committee print of H.R. 2986, offered by Mr. Tonko.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading without objection, so ordered. I recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The BEST Act rightfully directs federal dollars and expertise toward addressing a critically important issue. energy storage. However, regardless of the future innovation that would result from this investment, we know that demand for batteries and the materials needed to make them is growing. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, sales of electric vehicles are expected to grow 14-fold this decade and 28-fold next decade, with that demand for lithium, cobalt, nickel, and other critical minerals is also expected to rise. Of course, such increased demand will create increased waste. The Department of Energy estimates that we are going to have about 11 million tons of lithium-ion batteries die between now and 2030. So what do we do with this enormous stockpile of dead batteries? My amendment helps answer that question. It would establish an R&D program focused on critical mineral recycling from energy storage systems within DOE. Instead of dangerously and wastefully disposing of used batteries, we can recover and reuse their valuable mineral components to make new batteries and other technologies. There are several common-sense reasons why we need to invest in critical minerals recycling. One is American energy security. Today, we rely on China, Australia, Chile, Congo, and other nations for the minerals required for lithium-ion batteries. Foreign reliance has caused enormous volatility in their price. For example, cobalt has dropped from $90,000 to $30,000 per ton since 2017. For us to be a part of this burgeoning new market, we need a reliable, domestic source of materials at a consistent price. Recycling can provide that source. Additionally, recycling would allow us to distance ourselves from the significant environmental and human rights issues tied to the current critical minerals market. Recycling batteries and reusing critical minerals is possible today. In Europe, over 60% of the lithium in the economy is recovered through recycling. In China, Japan, and Korea, the percentage is even higher. We only recycle 5% of the lithium-ion batteries in the United States, despite recycling 97% of traditional lead-acid batteries. For additional research can help us understand and overcome the logistical, safety, technological, and non-technical barriers that are currently inhibiting the development of a U.S. recycling market. Collection and storage are major issues. I have heard from numerous companies that want to invest in domestic mineral recycling that it will not be profitable until we are able to provide a sufficient waste stream to supply recyclers. This amendment focuses DOE research on increasing and streamlining battery collection so that this waste ends up at a recycler and not a landfill, where it can pose a significant health and safety risk. In 2017, 65% of fires in California landfills were started by lithium-ion batteries. And last March, a lithium-ion battery sparked a 5-alarm fire in Queens, New York, that burned for 2 days. The amendment also focuses DOE research on determining how to safely store, transport, and stockpile lithium-ion batteries so that a stockpile can be maintained without a safety threat. The clean energy future that many of us dream of is going to require the deployment of millions of batteries for the grid and transportation. Rather than ignore foreseeable issues surrounding critical minerals and battery disposal, which will be upon us by the end of the decade, let's take steps today to try to solve them. Directing DOE to establish this RD&D program will go a long way to ensure these challenges can be met and the United States can develop a new, clean industrial sector that is needed nationwide. With that, Madam Chair, I urge members to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment?
No.
If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Next, we have the Sherrill Amendment that, on the roster, and offered by the gentlelady from New Jersey, and she's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 3, amendment to committee print.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, show ordered. I recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas, for holding this markup today. I also want to thank the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Foster, for his work on this bipartisan legislation. My amendment requires the Secretary to support research and development of manufacturing technologies that have the potential to improve U.S. competitiveness in energy storage manufacturing. This aligns with the Department of Energy's vision for establishing a domestic supply chain for energy storage by 2030 and serves two goals that we all support: promoting our national security and promoting economic development. Energy storage is a major focus of New Jersey's plan to create a sustainable energy future. To increase the amount of clean, renewable energy on the grid, energy storage is necessary to enhance the grid's ability to manage greater variability in demand for electricity. New Jersey is pursuing targets of 600 megawatts of electricity storage by 2021 and 2,000 megawatts by 2030. We are leading the nation on this front, and I promise you, demand for electricity storage technologies is only going to grow. The question is, will we capitalize and make the U.S. the global powerhouse for energy storage and manufacturing? We created groundbreaking advancements in solar energy, but then ceded the manufacturing base to countries like Germany and China. We are a global leader in developing energy storage technologies. We should do everything possible to also lead the world in manufacturing them. I thank the committee for working on a bipartisan basis to promote energy storage. I urge support for my amendment and the underlying bill, and I yield back.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Now, if there are any other amendments, they can be presented now. If no, a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 2986 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those no. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, or additional views on the measure. We now will have under consideration 4230, the Clean Industrial Technology Act of 2019. The clerk will report the bill.
Committee print of H.R. 4230.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendments. I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, to briefly speak on his bill.
I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Chair.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 4230, offered by Mr. Caston.
Ask unanimous consent to consider it as read, and we will recognize the gentleman for his explanation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we on this committee have heard time and time again, climate change poses an existential threat to our health, our economy, our national security, and of course our environment. Spike in heat strokes, childhood asthma cases, an impending 10% loss in GDP, increasing political unrest as arable land towards arid and refugee crises loom. The climate crisis is here, and we must address it with all the urgency and complexity that it warrants. We've begun this response with the lower-hanging fruit, those sectors of the economy and our society that are easy to decarbonize. So we have policies to incentivize power companies and utilities to move their generation away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner sources. We have plans in motion to encourage car companies to produce more efficient vehicles. We've talked about reforming the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and requiring public corporations to disclose their climate-related risks. But as meaningful, as important as all that is, we have to acknowledge that we cannot decarbonize the economy without also figuring out how to decarbonize hard-to-decarbonize sectors. We don't know how to make fertilizer without natural gas. We don't know how to make cement without coal. We don't know how to make silicon without coal. And I don't know how to build a solar panel without cement and silicon and steel. And I don't know how to feed 7 billion people without natural gas. The Clean Industrial Technology Act that is before us today takes a big step in that direction. The bill directs the Secretary of Energy to establish a Department of Energy-led cross-energy research program to reduce emissions from non-power industrial sectors. This includes everything from research on lowering emissions from iron and steel production to finding alternative materials to buildings, to reducing emissions from shipping, aviation, and other modes of long-distance transportation. The bill also authorizes $500 million in spending for demonstration projects to ensure that these technologies can be taken up by the private sector. These projects would aim to not only help the private sector implement cleaner technologies, but also to provide certainty to these businesses that the transition can be made smoothly and profitably. The bill also includes a technical assistance program allowing these private entities in the non-power industrial sectors to seek assistance from the Department of Energy as they try to reduce their emissions. Finally, the Clean Industrial Technology Act would create a federal advisory committee comprised of industry, academic, labor, and federal leaders to guide the industrial technology research program. With more people and perspectives with a seat at the table, it is my hope that we can not only ensure consistent progress towards meeting our goals, but also develop roadmaps to get there more efficiently. The transformation to greener manufacturing is not just critical to our planet, but also for American competitiveness in the 21st century. We are seeing a kind of industrial revolution around the globe as more countries and companies turn their gaze to zero net emission goals. The demand for clean energy and green products worldwide is staggering, and we must set up the U.S. industrial sector to capitalize on this growth and regain its throne as the economic engine of the world. This effort is not and should not be ideological. CETA has been endorsed by the Environmental Defense Fund and the United Steelworkers, but also by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. All of our nations are recognizing that we must decarbonize our industrial sector for the good of the planet, our workers, and our businesses. I was very proud to lead this effort alongside Chairwoman Johnson and Congressman McKinley, as well as Senators Whitehouse and Capito. I'd like to thank them all for their leadership and dedication to taking on this issue in a bipartisan and bicameral manner. I think it helps underscore just how essential this effort is. I urge support of this amendment. and the Clean Industrial Technology Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. H.R. 4230, the Clean Industrial Technology Act, or CETA, aims to reduce the industrial sector emissions through the establishment of a DOE research, development, and demonstration program, and a federal advisory committee to guide its priorities. At the subcommittee markup of this bill, I expressed my concerns about authorizing a new program with little consultation with stakeholders. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm pleased to say that the manager's amendment addresses those concerns and makes bipartisan changes I believe clarify and vastly improve the bill. In the past, I've also expressed concerns that the program established in this bill has the potential to duplicate existing research. Unfortunately, I think there are still parts of this legislation that might overlap with current programs. For instance, DoD programs like the Office of Fossil Energy, the Advanced Manufacturing Office, and the Building Technologies Office are all currently addressing different pieces of this legislation to improve efficiency and reduce emissions in power production and manufacturing. Before establishing something new, I believe we should attempt to leverage existing government resources by providing policy direction to those programs. With that being said, I want to make it clear that I applaud my colleagues for coming to the table in good faith and making this best effort to address my concerns. Because of that, I'm going to recommend we move this bill out of committee, even when our differences can't be fully resolved, since bipartisan negotiations can be enough to get the final product to the finish line. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time? Ms. Bonamici.
Chairwoman Johnson, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady is acknowledged.
Thank you. I first want to thank the chair and ranking member for holding this markup today on these important bills. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels would require unprecedented rates of transformation in many areas, including in the energy and industrial sectors. It's notoriously difficult to decarbonize the industrial sector. Our efforts will require reducing the demand for energy by improving the efficiency of industry production and eliminating additional emissions from industrial processes. I am pleased to be a co-sponsor of the Clean Industrial Technology Act, which would direct the Secretary of Energy to establish a cross-agency research program to decarbonize non-power industrial sectors. This research will focus on the most challenging industrial production processes to decarbonize, like cement, iron, and steel production, and opportunities to reduce emissions outside the power sector like shipping, aviation, and long-distance transportation. A cross-agency coordinated federal research and development program will substantially reduce industrial emissions, and this bill takes an important first step to accelerate the level of innovation necessary to achieve our decarbonization goals. I want to thank Congressman Caston for his leadership on this bill. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time? Seeing none, the chair then will go to the amendments. We'll proceed with them in the order on the roster. The manager's amendment appears first, and we'll recognize the gentleman from Illinois to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank, Mr. Lucas, want to thank you and your staff. Really appreciate the work that you all put in to come up with a bipartisan
Clerk will
solution.
report the amendment.
I apologize.
Amendment to H.R. 4230 offered by Mr. Caston.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading and without objection, so ordered. The chair now will recognize Mr. Caston for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The ill-informed rookie from Illinois still would like to thank Mr. Lucas and your staff for your help to work up this bipartisan compromise, and I encourage all to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further comments or recognitions sought for this amendment? Mr. Rooney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Caston, for introducing this legislation and for the participation of my fellow Oklahoman, Ranking Member Lucas. The manager's amendment makes several changes that provide clarity and direction in establishing a DOE research, development, and demonstration program. I want to thank my colleagues for working in such a bipartisan manner. As amended, H.R. 4320, the Clean Industrial Technology Act, responsibly addresses a key contributor of carbon emissions. Currently, the U.S. industrial sector accounts for roughly 22% of our greenhouse emissions. At the same time, our nation's economic security relies on the strength and international competitiveness of this sector. For instance, building materials like steel, aluminum, and cement, referred to previously, and the manufacturing processes which produce them are the backbone of many U.S. economic sectors and have no alternative or replacement. In order to protect our industries and our environment, we must prioritize early stage and innovative R&D, and that's why I'm glad to see H.R. 4320 take this important step in establishing a cross-cutting program to develop and evaluate advanced technologies which can reduce emissions in the industrial sector. As we put together priorities for this program, we must work with the relevant stakeholders to ensure that we are not forcing them to adopt processes that will undermine U.S. competitiveness. If our manufacturing jobs are sent overseas, in addition to the lost American jobs, we will end up with higher global emissions as well. I hope that the technologies developed through this program can be exported and adopted by other countries. This will ensure the continued United States leadership in industry and ensure that the cleanest and safest technologies are deployed throughout the world. This legislation is an important first step. The burden of reducing emissions should be a collective effort, and I am confident that the industrial sector can help pave the way. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is amendment offered by Mr. Babin. He's recognized to offer his amendment.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to the committee print of H.R. 4230.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading and without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for holding this markup, Chairwoman Johnson. My amendment is simple. Fossil fuels are essential to the United States' manufacturing and industrial competitiveness. Over the past 2 decades, Asia has accounted for 90% of all coal-fired capacity built worldwide, and the average plant is just 12 years old. They are growing, and they are using fossil fuels to do it. And you can be certain that they will not wait for us based on the promise of clean energy in the future. I'm supportive of basic research, and I think that some of our fundamental science will lead to breakthroughs that can help reduce carbon emissions across the board in the industrial sector. The intent of this bill is to focus on those areas and produce commercial technologies. But as it stands right now, we cannot abandon our tried and true infrastructure that is dependent upon fossil fuels. Over 80% of the United States' energy consumption comes from natural gas, oil, and coal, the 3 sources that we commonly refer to as fossil fuels. Plus, I would remind you all that America has reduced our emissions by 5% since the early 2000s. There is an estimated 1.7 trillion barrels of known oil reserves left on Earth. The U.S. is projected to double our export capacity of liquefied natural gas by the end of 2020. Leaving these 2 resources untapped is the equivalent of burying money underground and then forgetting the location. Factories, schools, and hospitals are dependent upon reliable power, and turning the switch off would be disastrous. Steel producers, cement kilns, recycling facilities have no other option than fossil fuels at the moment. As I look to my right and my left, there is not a single member here who wouldn't have their district affected if we walked away from fossil energy. With this in mind, there is a middle ground to be found. Carbon capture, materials research, and high-performance computing are all areas where basic research can yield promising results in emissions reduction. My point, and the point of this amendment, is this: don't make fossil fuels the enemy. Emissions are the common enemy, and technology can help mitigate those even in the fossil fuel industry, as we have seen in field studies field hearing down in Texas just recently. My amendment would send the message that our industries and our manufacturers have nothing to worry about. We're not going to force you to abandon your lifeline of fossil energy. We're here to help, and we're on your side in the fight to reduce carbon emissions. The great state of Texas and many other energy-producing states' economies depend on having open markets free of repressive regulations to continue our amazing prosperity and job creation of late. I emphasize the importance of this amendment. However, Madam Chair, I will at this time withdraw it and hope that in the future that we keep all of these ideals in mind. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other requests for time? Hearing none. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber. He's recognized to offer his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have an amendment on the ill-informed rookie from Illinois' bill at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 3, amendment to committee print
I
of
ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment would add a sense of Congress to this legislation that in order to reduce U.S. industrial emissions, all the while maintaining our economic competitiveness, we must prioritize research and development for all, and I emphasize all, innovative energy technologies. As ranking member of the Energy Subcommittee, my amendment states something I feel cannot be stressed enough, that any realistic strategy for our clean energy future must include an all of the above energy R&D approach, or in other words, leave no technology behind. H.R. 4230, or the Clean Industry Technology Act, looks to reduce emissions in the industrial sector through the commercialization of new technologies. Let me be clear. While I support the overall mission of this bill, I am concerned about the execution. By not clarifying our intent to consider all, and again I emphasize all, clean energy options, we run the risk of stalling innovation in the very technologies we will continue to rely on for many years to come. If our industries and manufacturers want to keep up with the economic boom we are experiencing today, while also pursuing new environmentally responsible energy practices, it is absolutely essential that we continue to consider not only renewable energy sources, but also fossil energy technologies and advanced nuclear power. We have already invested billions of dollars into our fossil energy infrastructure, and much of our economy is dependent on it. Why would we abandon our investment in what has proven to work? Instead, we must continue to focus on advanced technologies like cleaner natural gas and carbon capture and utilization technologies. Not only do these initiatives support the economically viable use of fossil fuels, but they also improve our efficiency, their efficiency, and reduce the impact on our environment. Similarly, in the United States, nuclear power has been established as a clean, safe, and reliable energy source that is actually growing more affordable each and every day, every year. Today, we see that private companies are taking the lead in developing advanced reactors that can provide industrial power, clean industrial power. With continued federal support for early-stage R&D, these advanced technologies could deliver cheap, reliable, and emissions-free power around the globe. The intention of my amendment is not combative. It is to remind Department of Energy and the entire federal research and development enterprise that we will only find clean energy success with a long-term, all-of-the-above approach. No technology should be overlooked, and no proven resource should be abandoned. I hope my message is clear and impactful to my colleagues, and especially the ill-informed rookie from Illinois, who I appreciate sponsoring the bill. And with that, Madam Chair, I withdraw my amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other amendments? A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 4230 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill will be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. The members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, or additional views on the measure. I want to thank both gentlemen from Texas. I know the history of our state, and I appreciate your participation. We will now consider H.R. 5374, the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act of 2019. The clerk will report the bill.
Committee print of H.R. 5374.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendments at any point. I will now recognize the sponsor of this bill, our ranking member, Mr. Lucas, to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. This morning, I'm grateful to have another opportunity to discuss our bill, H.R. 5374, the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act of 2019, which authorizes research, development, and demonstration of innovative geothermal energy technologies at the Department of Energy. Geothermal energy is a clean, renewable, and abundant domestic energy source. Our country has significant geothermal energy resources and leads the world in installed geothermal capacity. If harnessed correctly, these resources have the potential to provide reliable baseload power and adaptive energy storage for Americans across the country. But today, geothermal energy technologies are behind the renewable market curve. While the renewable energy sources account for approximately 18% of total utility-scale U.S. electricity generation, geothermal contributes less than 1%. This is because today's geothermal energy technologies are often too expensive, time-consuming, and risky for widespread industrial adaptation. In order for U.S. industry to take advantage of geothermal energy, geothermal technologies, and techniques which must become much more efficient and substantially less expensive for American consumers. The good news is that on the Science Committee, we are uniquely positioned to help prioritize the kind of early-stage research that leads to groundbreaking discoveries in energy technology. As we've heard so often in the committee hearings this Congress, federally funded research programs have an established history of paving the way for industrial innovation. This is especially true at the Department of Energy. H.R. 5374, the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act, will provide DOE with necessary funding and critical program direction to enable innovative research in advanced geothermal technologies, strengthening the U.S. geothermal workplace, leverage advanced computing practices for geothermal applications, support the construction of major advanced geothermal user facilities, and encourage international collaboration. By authorizing these programs, we can help U.S. industry improve the next generation of geothermal energy technologies using advanced designs to save time and money in planning and producing power more efficiently with less impact on the environment. I think these are goals we can all support. If we want to ensure the responsible development of a diverse portfolio of clean and domestically sourced energy technologies, we in Congress should prioritize this important early-stage research. In a moment, I'll offer a manager's amendment to this bill, which I encourage my colleagues to support, that provides valuable technical and conforming changes suggested by stakeholders. And I want to thank Chairwoman Johnson and her staff for supporting me on this amendment and for her continued support of this legislation. I look forward to continuing to work with you all to support this common sense, productive, and bipartisan a clean energy bill. And I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. I would like now to speak on the bill as I am a co-sponsor. Americans have used various forms of geothermal energy since the 1800s. Despite this long history, geothermal energy technologies have largely struggled to become or remain competitive in modern energy markets. Even though there are major opportunities for further advancement and commercialization, for example, in my home state of Texas, there is great potential for geothermal energy production that remains untapped. With naturally occurring large wells of hot water and other promising heat reservoirs below the ground, energy produced by geothermal technologies do not emit greenhouse gases. Just this Congress alone, the committee has passed several bills that will reduce the impact of climate change, and I'm hoping we can help a few more along the way today. Additionally, not only can geothermal technologies produce clean electricity, but they can also be used for industrial applications, such as producing high levels of heat that are necessary for various manufacturing processes. These are all reasons why I am pleased that these issues received serious attention during an Energy Subcommittee hearing in November. That hearing brought together esteemed experts, one of which from the great state of Texas, I might add, who reinforced our understanding that geothermal energy production has huge potential as an essential resource in our clean energy technology portfolio. I'm also happy to say that this bill was unanimously reported out of the subcommittee markup held in December. So I'm glad that we're addressing this important issue today by considering the Advanced Geothermal Research and Development Act, introduced by Mr. Lucas, my friend, the ranking member, which I'm again a proud co-sponsor. And I want to thank you, Mr. Lucas, for working with us and introducing this great piece of legislation. The bill includes research initiatives on oil and gas technology transfer to geothermal research, secondary use research areas such as minerals recovery and storage, and new areas of research in enhanced geothermal systems. It also authorizes groundbreaking new research activities in advanced geothermal computing and data science, as well as research in heat pump technologies and direct use applications. I look forward to continuing to work together with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass legislation that helps advance geothermal energy, along with a broad range of other clean energy technologies. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to congratulate you and Mr. Lucas for being examples for all of us on how to get good legislation done. I am excited about this bill. I am excited about geothermal. In my hometown neighborhood, we have a new development, a big house coming in, and they are using geothermal. And we have seen geothermal technologies create jobs, create supply chains, and help us to address some of our energy issues. So often, the Science Committee is a best practice and a great example of how Congress should work collaboratively together with a focus on research and the next generation. I think that it is worth noting that the Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office is going to be reawakened when we pass this legislation through committee, pass it on the floor of the House floor of the Representatives, and continue to move our country forward. So thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you very much. We will now proceed with the amendments in order of the roster. And the first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by Ranking Member Mr. Lucas, and he's recognized to offer this amendment.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to committee print of
I
HR.
ask unanimous consent to dispense of the reading and without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
In the spirit of the efficient use of time, Chair, I would simply note to the committee that these are confirming and technical changes, and I ask their adoption and yield back.
Thank you. Any further discussion? The vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Now, Mr. Tonko. Okay, the next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, and he's recognized to offer his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to committee print of HR
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and Ranking Member Lucas for introducing this bipartisan, forward-thinking bill. It will be necessary for us to harness the energy in the earth right beneath our feet to achieve our goal of a clean energy future. The research funded in this bill will develop technologies that convert naturally occurring geothermal heat into usable, zero-carbon energy. In doing so, this bill will also help create thousands of good-paying technical jobs in the energy, environmental, and drilling sectors. My amendment to this bill simply encourages that geothermal R&D occurs where it would be most useful. Geothermal plants require enormous initial capital investment, and like most clean energy solutions, their success hinges on their viability as a commercially competitive solution. Up until now, most American geothermal R&D has focused on a relatively specific application in a relatively specific area, electricity generation in the Mountain West. However, according to DOE's GeoVision report, deployment of geothermal technology can be most profitable when used to directly heat buildings rather than provide electric power in communities with relatively high population density. This amendment provides that DOE consider these factors when choosing sites to demonstrate geothermal technology. The type of geothermal development that I'm referring to is known as direct use, and I thank Mr. Lipinski for introducing an amendment at the subcommittee markup to prioritize direct use R&D. Direct use heat doesn't need the extremely hot ground temperatures that electricity generation needs, and because of that, the technology is available nationwide. Direct use also provides an economic decarbonization solution for a very difficult problem. Direct emissions from residential and commercial buildings, primarily used for heating, account for some 9% of total U.S. carbon emissions, and that percentage is higher in densely populated, cold communities in the Northeast and Midwest. For example, in New York State, buildings represent over 30% statewide emissions. The GeoVision report itself states that the regions have high economic potential for direct use development. The sites that DOE chooses to test direct use technology should consider this potential. With that, I thank the committee for working with me on this simple amendment, and I urge members to support it. And with that, Madam Chair, yield back.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If no, then the reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 5374 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. And members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, or additional views on this measure. Next, we have before us 5428 for consideration. The chair will now consider the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act of 2019, and the clerk will report the bill.
Committee print to H.R. 5428.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to any amendment at any point. I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Lamb, to briefly speak on his bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I want to thank my Republican co-sponsor, Representative Herrera Butler, and the entire Republican committee staff for their work with us on this bill. I think if you think about the work that this committee has done in the last couple of years, we have sought to improve the authorization funding levels, focus on various sources of energy, and it remains to be done how we optimize the mix of those sources of energy on the grid on a day-to-day basis. And I think if you think about the future where we have more renewables that can produce more power on one day based on wind and solar conditions and less power on the next day based on unpredictable weather factors. As we get more storage online with research like we're authorizing today and the other bills, as we develop all of these new technologies, you will still need a system of wires and transformers and sensors that can give us the optimal mix, almost the money ball of our energy grid, if you will. So I think that's where our focus should be on this bill. I'm happy to be part of it. I also think going forward, as we see more electrification of manufacturing processes, I would bet that everyone in here has a company in their district which has built its own microgrid to be the primary source of energy. I know we're doing that potentially at Pittsburgh International Airport and integrating individual microgrids into the optimal mix of our overall grid. These are going to be big challenges, and I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure we do that in a way that serves our climate goals and also serves the important goals of keeping energy cheap and affordable for business interests as well as homeowners. All of these things are important. And then lastly, I'll just mention, of course, we know that the grid itself is going to be at a greater physical risk going forward, depending which part of the country you're in, whether it's fires. In my part of the country, it has more to do with landslides and intense rainstorms. Every single year, it seems like now we're losing power lines and losing parts of the grid for long periods of time as a result of that. So some of this research would also help us strengthen the resiliency of the grid going forward in a difficult climate environment, and I think that's why it has been endorsed by a broad array of concerned groups, BPC Action, Duke Energy, Edison Electric Institute, Union for Concerned Scientists, Rural Electric Cooperative Association, and the United States Chamber of Commerce. So I thank all of them for their support as well. This is a great example of bipartisan legislation that we can all get behind, and I yield back to the chairwoman and thank her for her support.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time? Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I seek to strike the last word. This is another exciting and important piece of legislation that we're putting through our committee here today, the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that's going to identify research needs, assess progress on research activities, and update relevant technology roadmaps. And this legislation came together in a very remarkable and admirable way through the leadership of my friend and colleague, Connor Lamb, who up until recently was serving as the subcommittee chair for our Energy Committee here on House Science. And it's worth allocating a few words to the leadership that Connor brings, not only to this committee as a whole, but to this Congress. We all remember when Connor came into the body. He came in, it was a trying time for the country, and it was a trying time in his district, and he came in as a beacon of trust and hope, and he has brought us to a better place through helping us get this legislation done, and in partnership with Ms. Herrera Butler and other co-sponsors. And I think all of us should be reminded why we are here. We are here to get things done on behalf of the taxpayers and the American public who is counting on us. This Science Committee sometimes doesn't make the headline news, although we are the drivers of a large segment of our country's GDP and our innovation capabilities. And I think the time will come when individuals will look back to the legislation that the 116th Congress passed through this committee, and they will look back at the leadership of Connor Lamb, who made this bipartisan, who made it so that we could have this fabulous piece of R&D. We're so glad we're doing basic research here together, and we're looking forward to the applications in the next phase.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I will yield.
Is the gentlelady from Michigan saying that because Connor came in, it was a trying time? I just was wanting to verify that. I yield back.
I am happy to clarify that he came in and made it better.
Thank you very much.
Would the gentlelady yield for one statement?
Absolutely.
Your comments about Connor come as no surprise, because before he came to Congress, he was a proud member of the United States Marine Corps in the Department of the Navy. Semper Fi. I yield back.
Semper Fi.
Any other requests for comment? Where are we here? Without objection, the bill is now considered. Whoops. Yeah, we will proceed with amendments as listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Fletcher. She's recognized to offer the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to committee print of H.R. 5428, offered by Ms. Fletcher.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, so ordered. I recognize Ms. Fletcher for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for holding this markup this morning and advancing all of the important legislation that we are addressing here this morning. I'm introducing an amendment today to H.R. 5428, the Grid Modernization Research and Development Act that we've been discussing. This amendment would direct the Department of Energy to conduct research on the important topic of inoperability. The number of devices and systems connecting to the electric grid is increasing rapidly. When we talk about a smart grid, this is really what we're referring to, a future electric grid that is dynamic, flexible, and automated. In order to achieve this vision, we need a strategy for integrating devices and systems that work together to ensure that we have a reliable, resilient electric grid. In March of 2018, DOE published an inoperability strategic vision that set forth a plan for advancing integration of distributed energy resources and other energy technologies onto the electric grid. This was a step in the right direction, and this amendment will help support DOE in these efforts and will ensure that this important research area is given the attention that it deserves. Thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Weber,
I move to strike the last word.
the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Chair, I want to say that I'm supporting her amendment and that I would like to, kind of in the spirit of bipartisanship, and as we do on the floor of the House, when we adjourn from this hearing today, that we adjourn in honor of her 29th birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday, Lizzie.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank you very much. Any other requests for time? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 5428 as amended to the House, and the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on this measure. We will now consider H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 5760, a bill.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Barrett, to speak on his bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas. I'm proud that today that our committee is advancing bipartisan legislation to address threats to our electrical grid. A strong and secure electrical grid is critical to our quality of life, economy, and national security. However, the cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving, with attacks on the grid becoming more and more frequent. Last year, remote hackers attacked the U.S. grid networks for the first time, affecting several western states, including California, Utah, and Wyoming. Following this attack, the President and CEO of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, testified before Congress in July, stating, "The threat from a cybersecurity attack is at an all-time high." In addition, our electric grid is increasingly more vulnerable to natural disasters like wildfires and hurricanes. From coast to coast, the U.S. has been hit by major hurricanes, storms, and wildfires that have left Americans without electricity, disrupting daily life and crippling local economies. Hearing from my constituents regarding the California wildfires made it abundantly clear that protecting the electrical grid was a priority for them. That's why I'm proud to introduce the bipartisan Grid Security Research and Development Act alongside Congressman Weber to strengthen the resiliency of the U.S. electric grid and protect the American public. Our legislation focuses on sustained investment in research and technologies to keep pace with the rapidly evolving threats to our electric grid. The bill focuses on protecting our grid from 2 major threats, cyber and physical. I'm also proud that this bill would provide funding to develop technologies that would toughen our grid against wildfires and other natural disasters by improving early detection of deteriorating electrical transmission and distribution equipment that can tend to spark and come in contact with vegetation during high wind events and natural disasters that cause wildfires. My bill, in tandem with the 4 other important energy bills that are being considered today, take a holistic approach to driving towards a cleaner and safer future for the American public. We're here to make government work for our constituents and for the American people, and to address their concerns and create solutions. Thank you again, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, for supporting this important priority for California and for America, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time?
Madam Chair, move to strike the last word.
Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Lucas, for holding today's markup. I am also, like my colleague from California, proud to speak this morning in support of H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act, of which I am an original co-sponsor. Folks, a secure, resilient, and reliable electric grid is essential to America's national and economic security. When I speak to crowds, I will often say the things that make America great are the things that America makes. How do we do that? Again, with a secure, resilient, and reliable electrical grid, it is absolutely essential. Every aspect of our daily lives and every economic sector in our nation depends on the uninterrupted flow of power to function properly. Recognizing this, the Trump administration has consistently emphasized the importance of grid's cybersecurity, of resilience, and emergency response, and has made these issues a major priority. Cyber and physical threats to our electric grid are constantly evolving and increasing in magnitude. According to IBM, last year, cyber attacks against vital energy sector technologies like industrial control and operational systems increased by more than 2,000% from 2018. In fact, in 2019, in the United States, our energy sector ranked 9th in the industries most targeted by cyber attacks. So it is clear that this bipartisan legislation is both timely and absolutely necessary. H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act, authorizes a multi-agency research and development program to bolster the cyber and physical security capabilities of this very energy sector. It also authorizes key federal agencies like DOE and the National Science Foundation to support early-stage research, development, and demonstration activities that will advance critical energy sector cybersecurity technologies while improving the security of energy sector information systems. It is in line with this administration's priorities, H.R. 5760. It also authorizes a DOE research, development, and demonstration program that focuses on the discovery of new innovative tools and new technologies that will improve the resilience, reliability, and emergency response capabilities of our electric grid. Just 3 years ago, Hurricane Harvey hit the Texas Gulf Coast, my district, ground zero for Harvey flooding. Hurricane Harvey caused significant damage to generators and transmission lines and outages for many homes and businesses in my very district. Luckily, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT as we call it, was up to date on their planning and management. The Texas grid was able to quickly recover from a devastating Category 4 hurricane. That's just one example of how it is not a question of if the U.S. power grid will face a significant physical or cyber threat. It is simply a matter of when. The modernization and security of the national electricity system must be one of our top priorities. I want to thank Dr. Barra for introducing this legislation and members and staff on both sides of the aisle for working in such a collaborative manner to prepare this bill for today's markup. I encourage my colleagues to support this timely bipartisan legislation to improve the cyber and physical security of our nation's very energy sector. Madam Chair, I appreciate you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Any other requests for time? We will now proceed with amendments in order on the roster, and the first amendment on the roster is the amendment offered by Mr. Bear, and he's recognized to offer an amendment.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to H.R. 5760.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas. I rise to offer a management amendment to offer technical corrections to the bill like wording and line numbering. As I emphasized before, the bill will support important research and development to address the evolving cybersecurity threats to our grid and ensure that our grid is resilient to disasters like hurricanes, floods, and the terrible wildfires which have spread across my home state of California. I encourage all my colleagues to support my amendment, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren, and Mr. McNerney is recognized.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to H.R.
I
57.
ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman to explain the amendment for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The needs and challenges surrounding our grid infrastructure have changed considerably since Congress passed the last significant legislation in this area. Traditionally, the conversation around grid resilience has been how to harden the grid without natural disasters, to withstand natural disasters. However, we now have the problem of electric grid infrastructure starting wildfires, especially in my state of California. States prone to wildfires have been working on this issue for a while, and it's time for the federal government to catch up. This amendment would help address that. Significant investments at the federal level on research and technology are necessary to ensure the safety, continuous delivery, and reliability of electricity across all states. So I want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Lamb and Mr. Barra, for introducing H.R. 5428 and H.R. 5760 on R&D for grid modernization and security. Last year in Northern California, we had several large, long-duration power outages, including ones that affected my home, better known as public safety power shutoff events, meant to prevent wildfires sparked by electric grid infrastructure during extreme wind and dry conditions. My amendment, or Ms. Lofgren's amendment, would provide for the improvement in execution of emergency power shutoffs from the planning to the power restoration through a grant program established in Section 1311. While there is a considerable amount of data being collected in this space, states need the tools to standardize and coordinate this data across all relevant entities for the purposes of not just emergency response, but for the planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of transmission infrastructure. My amendment, again, Ms. Lofgren's amendment, would provide technical assistance to relevant entities looking to do just that. Lastly, we have a workforce shortage in the area due to sudden growth in demand for individuals qualified and trained in grid resilience technology. This amendment would establish a training program to support the development of the grid workforce through the use of tools, technologies, and methods developed under the grant program. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Walsh, and he's recognized for 5 minutes to offer his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 3, amendment to committee print
I
of
ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered, and I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Lucas. This amendment to H.R. 5760, the Grid Security Research and Development Act, requires the Secretary of Energy to carry out a program in coordination with the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security to help ensure the security and resilience of critical grid infrastructures. In carrying out this program, it also requires the Secretary to establish and operate a critical infrastructure test facility that allows for both physical and cyber performance testing to be conducted on large-scale infrastructure systems. The goal of this research is to improve the development of new energy technologies, advance our understandings of integrated grid systems. A dedicated critical infrastructure test facility can provide American researchers with access to the cybersecurity and electric grid test beds that are necessary to perform this next-generation R&D. As more industrial control systems come online, and as a diversity of energy sources are integrated into the grid, we must invest strategically in the long-term, early-stage research that will protect our energy infrastructure from a variety of emerging threats. The investments authorized in my amendment will do just that, and they will act as an accelerator to the R&D programs authorized in H.R. 5760, driving forward innovation and maximizing return on taxpayer dollars. The partnership between the federal government, the national labs, academia, and industry has the potential to transform energy delivery systems. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle as we continue supporting advanced grid security research and our shared mission goals to develop future energy delivery systems that are reliable, resilient, and secure. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 5760 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, or additional views on this measure. I want to thank all of the members in attendance, and that concludes our markup. The committee is adjourned.